For the last 17 years, Apple's built an empire on one simple rule: if you want an app, you get it from us and us only. But yesterday that empire cracked. Apple just announced it's opening Brazil to third-party app stores. And here's the thing that changes everything: this isn't a generous choice. This is regulatory surrender. Brazil forced Apple's hand. Think of the App Store like a fortress, walls everywhere. You want in? Apple decides. You want your product on those shelves. Apple takes 30%. It's ruthless, it's legal, and it's made Apple hundreds of billions of dollars. But for the first time, those walls are coming down, not in the way Apple wanted. Why Brazil? Because Brazil passed a digital markets law that says big tech companies can't be gatekeepers anymore. Starting next year, Brazilian iPhone users can download apps from anywhere, not forced through Apple's store, not forced to pay Apple's cut. And here's what makes this huge: Brazil isn't alone. The European Union already passed similar rules. The United Kingdom is moving that direction. Australia's considering it. What started in one country could spread worldwide. Apple's fortress that looked permanent for a decade and a half is suddenly vulnerable. Apple's App Store launched in 2008 with exactly 500 apps. Today it has 2 million, and that monopoly made Apple staggeringly rich. The 30% commission isn't just revenue, it's leverage. If your app threatens Apple, Apple can kill you. Reject it, remove it, you're done. This worked perfectly for years because Apple controlled every layer. They sold the hardware, then they sold the software, then they took a cut of every purchase inside that software. It's called vertical integration, and it's brilliant business if nobody stops you. But the cracks started showing. In 2021, Epic Games, the company behind Fortnite, sued Apple over that 30% cut. They argued Apple was abusing its monopoly power. The case lasted years. Apple partly lost. But here's the thing: Apple fought back. They lobbied governments. They delayed. They pushed back hard. Then regulators everywhere woke up. The European Union said no more gatekeeping. They passed the Digital Markets Act and fined Apple over $1.5 billion. That's when the real pressure started. Apple had to start allowing alternative stores in Europe. Brazil watched. Other nations watched. And suddenly Apple's system, that looked untouchable for 17 years, started looking fragile. The dominoes were lined up, and Brazil just knocked one over. So what's actually changing in Brazil? Starting next year, iPhone users won't be trapped in Apple's store anymore. They can download Samsung's App Store. They can use Epic Games' store, the same one Apple tried to destroy. They can install apps that Apple would never approve. For developers, this is huge. Imagine you make productivity software and you want to charge $5 instead of selling subscriptions. Apple never would have allowed that. Now you can. Imagine you make a payment app and you want your own payment processor instead of Apple's. Now that's possible too. But here's what's complicated. Apple isn't just opening the floodgates. They're requiring third-party stores to verify apps, get security certificates, and follow certain rules. Apple's not being completely hands-off. They are saying yes, alternative stores can exist, but they have to be legitimate. It's regulation with guardrails. For regular users, it means choice. More apps, potentially cheaper apps, because developers don't have to pay Apple's 30% tax. It means your iPhone could look totally different in Brazil than someone's iPhone in the United States. It means the software ecosystem is fragmenting. And fragmentation is actually more complicated than monopoly. Let's get concrete. What does this look like in practice? First, smaller app creators finally get a shot. Right now, if your app doesn't fit Apple's narrow rules, you're out of luck. But alternative stores can be way more flexible. You could have niche apps, experimental apps, apps for tiny communities that Apple never deemed profitable. Second, competing payment systems. Currently, every purchase on iOS goes through Apple's system, and Apple skims 30%. But alternative stores might let you pay the developer directly. Imagine buying an ebook app and paying the publisher directly instead of through Apple's layer. That's possible now. Third, emulators and game stores. Right now, you can't download a Game Boy emulator on the iPhone through Apple's store because Apple says emulators are too risky. But alternative stores, they might allow them. You could have entire game libraries available. But here's the catch, and this is important: Brazil is watching for disaster. If alternative stores become vectors for malware, if fraud explodes, if the experience becomes fragmented and confusing, the government could shut the whole thing down. Apple's betting on chaos. They're hoping Brazil's app ecosystem becomes so messy that users regret the freedom. So alternative stores have to be legitimate, secure, and user-friendly, or this experiment fails. That's exactly what makes this moment so interesting. So is Brazil the first? No, it's not. Google's been allowing third-party stores on Android since the beginning. Samsung has its own app store. Amazon has one. Anyone can sideload apps on Android if they know how. This isn't new for the Android ecosystem. But iOS never allowed this, ever. Apple's closed system was the entire selling point. It's secure because we control it. It's simple because there's only one store. That was the pitch for 17 years. Now the European Union forced Apple to allow alternative stores too. So Brazil's not first, but it's significant because Brazil's approach is faster and simpler than Europe's. Europe required Apple to implement technical systems to let users sideload and use alternatives. It's complex, but Brazil is being more aggressive. Meanwhile, China already forced Apple to allow alternative app stores years ago. But Apple handled that differently. They restricted what those stores could do. They're trying to do the same in Brazil, but the Brazilian government isn't having it. They want real competition, not fake compliance. Here's the global pattern. Governments are moving toward the same conclusion. Monopoly app stores are bad for innovation, bad for developers, bad for competition. Once one country does it, pressure spreads. Apple can't have different rules in every country forever. Eventually this becomes everywhere. For now, Brazil is the flashpoint. For Apple, this is bad for one reason: money, not catastrophic, but real. They lose 30% of every app sale in Brazil. Maybe that's millions of dollars a year. More importantly, they lose control. Developers stop asking Apple's permission. They stop building apps Apple wants them to build. They build what they actually think customers want. For developers, it's liberation. Imagine being an app creator who makes great software, but Apple rejects it for some arbitrary reason. Now you have options. Your app exists somewhere. You reach customers, you survive. For users, it's complicated. You get choice. That's good. But choice also means responsibility. You need to be careful about which stores you trust. You need to evaluate security yourself. Not every alternative app store is vetted the same way Apple vets apps. Some could be sketchy, some could be risky. Freedom and responsibility go together. Here's the bigger implication, though. This breaks Apple's entire business model assumption. Apple spent 17 years convincing Wall Street that the iPhone revenue story goes like this: sell hardware, then rake in software profit forever through the App Store. But if developers can reach users through alternative channels, that recurring revenue machine gets less reliable. Investors are watching. This is why Apple fought so hard in court. It's not just about apps. It's about the fundamental economics of the iPhone business. So how does a Brazilian iPhone user actually find and use a third-party app store? First, they get a notification that alternative stores exist. Apple has to inform users. That's part of the regulation. Users can then download a third-party store app, maybe Samsung's, maybe Epic's, maybe some startup nobody's heard of yet. Then inside that store, they browse apps just like Apple's store. The store app handles installation. It handles updates. But here's the critical part. These alternative stores need security certificates from Apple. Apple can't just blanket reject them. Apple has to maintain a list of approved third-party stores and let installation happen. For regular app updates, a user just opens the alternative store app and taps update. Same workflow as Apple's store, just a different company running it. The complicated part comes if something goes wrong. If an app misbehaves, who's responsible? Is it the alternative store's fault for not vetting properly? Is it the app developer's fault? This legal question hasn't been fully settled yet. Brazil will figure it out as real problems emerge. Also, not every app will be available everywhere. Some developers might stay Apple exclusive. Some might use alternative stores. This creates a fragmented ecosystem. Users need to know where to look. It's more complexity, but it's the price of freedom. Here's what matters about this moment. For 17 years, Apple said this is how mobile phones have to work. One company controls everything. It's better for security. It's better for users. Millions of people believed that. It became the default story about iPhones. But today, Brazil just said we disagree. And now other governments are saying the same thing. The assumption that built Apple's fortress was wrong. Markets work better with competition. Users do want choice. Even if choice is complicated, this isn't the end of Apple's dominance. iPhones still have the premium hardware, the smooth software, the privacy reputation, but it is the end of Apple's absolute gatekeeping. Your iPhone software future is no longer entirely Apple's decision alone. Watch what happens in Brazil over the next year. If alternative stores thrive and prove legitimate, expect this everywhere. Europe will enforce it harder. The United States might follow. China will lean on Apple even more. What seemed permanent is now temporary. What seemed inevitable is now negotiable. For developers watching this right now, start thinking about alternative distribution. For users, the iPhone ecosystem is about to get messy and complicated and full of possibility. For Apple, you got away with this model for longer than any tech company ever has, but markets eventually open up, and that era just ended.